Well, greetings everybody. So in the last video, I introduced the concept of variation. I said we want some way to measure how spread out data might be, and the ways we can do that are with the range, the variance, and the standard deviation. And all of those numbers, maybe in slightly different ways, tell me how spread out data in a data set is. The bigger these numbers are, generally speaking, the more spread out the data is going to be. On top of that, I said the way that we do these formulas, the way the calculations are done and so on, and the names are going to be different sometimes between populations and samples. Okay? A population is different than a sample. We take a sample from a population in order to study the population. Okay? I've already made a video about what the difference between a population and a sample is, but let it stand for now that for measures of variation, the way that we do the math and the names of the formulas and so on are different for populations and samples. Now, I wrote the mathematical formulas down when I first introduced these concepts, and I actually worked them with those formulas the first time I showed you. But that will be impractical most of the time. If the data set has a lot of numbers into it, this is going to be difficult to do on paper with pencil. So we're going to use some kind of calculator almost all the time. So let's do this. Here's two questions from my math lab where I'll show you how to use calculators that most people have at their disposal. All right. So this one says we have the number of regular season wins for 10 football teams. And I have the data set. I want the range, mean, variance, and standard deviation. And it's a population. Okay. So there has to be some kind of clue in the question about whether I'm dealing with a population versus a sample, because some of the formulas are different. Some of the calculations are different between populations and samples. So here it tells me it's a population. So I want the range, mean, variance, and standard deviation, considering that this data set is a population. Now, one way that we can use a calculator to do this is to use statcrunch, which is available in my math lab. If you're within my math lab working on a problem and you have a data set like in this problem, clicking on that icon will allow you to open it in statcrunch, and then we can use the calculators provided there. All right, so I will do that, but I need to tell you what some of the commands are going to look like. All right, now I want for this population the range, mean, variance, and standard deviation. So mean is either population or sample mean. This is the command in statcrunch. Range is either the population or sample range. So I'll use mean and range. Now I want population variance and population standard deviation, and here are the commands for those two. Unadjusted variance and unadjusted standard deviation. So what you're looking at right there, that's the way the command's going to appear in statcrunch. Okay. Now I have this data open in statcrunch, it turns out. Okay. And so I'll open that up for you and I'll show you. Okay, so here's this data in statcrunch. All right. Now, if I want to use statcrunch, first I'll go to stat and summary stats to calculate all these things. And so that's going to look like this. Here's the stat menu. Here's summary stats. And I choose columns because my data is organized into columns. So I do like this. Now, if I have data in more than one column, I'll select the column I want to work with at the moment, which is VAR1. And then down here, remember those commands I needed? It was mean, whoops. Okay, there they all are. Unadjusted standard deviation for population standard deviation, unadjusted variance for population variance, mean, and range. Okay, now if I want to select more than one of these, I have to hold down the control button to do that. All right, now so that's what I wanted. That encompasses everything I need for this question. And I do compute, and there it is. Okay, so the standard deviation 4.67, that would round to 4.7 if, as the question says, I round to the nearest tenth. Mean 8.1, okay, range 13, and unadjusted variance or population variance 21.89, which would round to 21.9 if I do as it says and round to the nearest tenth. Okay, So those are the commands that we can use to find population statistics. Okay. Now I'll go over to this next problem at this point. Let's do this one now. Here I'm given the ages and years of a random sample. Okay, so it tells me it's a sample right off the bat of shoppers at a gaming store. Okay, and same thing, I've got the data as shown. I want the range, mean, variance, and standard deviation, and it's a sample. Okay, so again, I have it over here. For the mean, I can sample mean or population mean goes by the command mean. Range, population or sample range. Variance would be sample variance. That's what I want over here. And standard deviation will be the sample standard deviation. Okay. All right. So that's how I'll do this one. It's a sample. I have to use the calculation commands accordingly. So if I want to do that, now this data is in set VAR3. I'll go to calculators, summary stats columns, VAR3, and then I need to select mean, variance, standard deviation, and range. Whoops. Mean, variance, standard deviation, range. Okay. I got it all in. I can compute it, and there it is. Okay, so let's see. Range is 11. Mean is 16.7. Variance 13.788, and so on. It does say to round to the nearest 10th, so I'll get 13.8 if I do that. And then standard deviation 3.71, rounded to the nearest 10th again, I get 3.7. Okay, so that's how you can use statcrunch to find either the population or sample, range, mean, variance, and standard deviation. Just use these commands in the menu as I mentioned it. Another way that you could do it, and that I think you should know, is to use Excel. I think you should know how to use Excel just because Excel is used for so many other different things. If you don't know how to use Excel, I think now's the time, honestly. So once again, if I'm working in my math lab, I can open it in Excel, okay, if I wanted to. Or if you say you already know how to use Excel and you're just comfortable with it, then I can put the data in there or open it in there however I want to. And in each problem, one was a population and the other was a sample. So my examples, here are those data sets for what I was working with. Okay, over here, this question, the population data set, this the sample. And then here's the commands or the code for using Excel. We use average for the mean. We use var.p for the population variance, and stdev.p for the population standard deviation. Okay, so there's your population statistics. For the sample, we use average for the sample mean, var.s for the sample variance, and stdev.s for the sample standard deviation. And I get the same results. All right. Now I would learn how to do both. I would learn how to use statcrunch, and I would learn how to use Excel just because I think you should know how to do that anyway. Now, word of caution though, for our assignments, it does have statcrunch built in, and so you might gravitate towards that most of the time. Plus, on the test, since the browser's locked down, you won't be able to open Excel separately. Okay, so I'd say to learn to use both because of that. All right, learn to use statcrunch because it's here and sometimes it's all you'll have. But I think you should learn to use Excel because, like I said, I just think it's good to do that anyway. You can do lots of other things in Excel, and Excel is widely available outside of my math lab.